The door hissed open before I could stop myself, and the first thing I saw was a pair of glowing violet eyes locking onto mine from across a room that was definitely not my quarters. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze in the doorway, one hand still on the panel, my brain trying to catch up with what my eyes were telling me. Silk curtains floated in slow motion around a chamber lit by soft, drifting orbs of light, and standing in the center of it all was a woman, if I could even call her that, 9 feet tall, skin the color of a bruised sky, with ridges along her skull that curved like a crown grown from bone. She turned fully toward me. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed, or at least I didn't, because I was fairly certain my lungs had stopped working out of pure terror. I was Ethan Marlowe, 3 days into a diplomatic exchange posting aboard the Velkaran royal vessel, and I had just walked into what I would later learn was the single most forbidden room on the entire ship. My translator earpiece was still charging on my nightstand, a mistake I would replay in my head for the rest of my life. Without it, every word she might say to me would be gibberish, and every word I said back would sound like static to her. I had nothing, no training for this. No protocol memorized, just me, standing in a doorway, staring at alien royalty I had no business seeing. She said something. Her voice was low, sharp, edged with an authority that needed no translation. I understood none of the words, but I understood the tone. It was the tone of someone who was used to being obeyed instantly, and who was now waiting to see what kind of creature had just wandered into her private world uninvited. I did the only thing my panicked mind could think of. I raised both hands, slow, non-threatening, and bowed as deeply as I could without falling over. It was clumsy. It probably looked ridiculous, but it was all I had. She did not move. She did not blink, if Velkarans even blinked. She simply watched me, tilting her head slightly, the way a person might study an unfamiliar insect that had crawled onto their dinner table. I took a step back toward the door, desperate to undo the last 10 seconds of my life, but the panel beside the frame let out a low chime and flashed a color I did not recognize. The door did not open again. It had locked itself, and from the sound of it, that was not something that happened by accident. My stomach dropped. I was trapped in a room with the most protected person on the ship, unable to speak her language, unable to explain myself, and now unable to leave. Somewhere beyond the door, I heard footsteps, fast ones, many of them, moving in unison, the kind of rhythm that only comes from trained guards responding to an alarm. My mind raced through every horror story I had heard from the other exchange officers about Velkaran law. Their culture did not deal in warnings. It dealt in consequences. I turned back to her, my palms still raised, my voice shaking as I spoke the only Velkaran phrase I actually knew by memory. Something I had picked up from a language chip during the shuttle ride over. I had practiced it as a greeting. In my panic, I said it wrong, stringing it together with a gesture I had seen a maintenance worker use, something meant to indicate deep apology. What came out of my mouth, according to what I would learn much later, was something closer to, "I am a very foolish soft creature. Please do not remove my head." There was a pause, a long one, and then something happened that I was completely unprepared for. She laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a controlled diplomatic smile. A real laugh, the kind that doubled her over slightly, one hand reaching out to steady herself against a tall stone pedestal beside her. Her shoulders shook. A sound came from her that was somewhere between a bell and a growl, and I realized, with equal parts relief and confusion, that this was genuine, unguarded laughter. I stood there, hands still raised, utterly lost, as the doors behind me burst open with a mechanical groan, and a wall of armored guards flooded into the room, weapons raised, eyes locked on me with an intensity that made my knees weak. The lead guard shouted something, and every barrel in the room adjusted its aim toward my chest. I closed my eyes, certain this was it, certain that my clumsy mistake was about to become the shortest diplomatic career in the history of human space travel. Then I heard her voice again, sharp, commanding, cutting through the tension like a blade. The guards froze. Nobody fired, nobody moved. I opened my eyes to see her step forward, still smiling, waving a hand toward the guards in a gesture that clearly meant stand down. They lowered their weapons, though every one of them looked at me like I had just done something impossible. Maybe I had. I would not fully understand how impossible until later. She spoke again, this time slower, as if she somehow expected me to understand through tone alone. Then she gestured toward the door, and toward me, and said a word I would later learn meant guest. The guards exchanged looks I could not read. One of them, an older officer with silver markings across her jaw, stepped forward and studied me for a long moment before turning back to the princess and asking something in a tone that sounded almost like disbelief. The princess answered without hesitation, her voice firm, final, the kind of tone that ended arguments before they started. I still did not understand a single word being exchanged, but I understood the shift in the room. The tension that had filled the air like electricity a moment ago was gone, replaced by something closer to stunned silence. One of the younger guards leaned toward the officer and whispered something, glancing at me sideways. I caught the word Velkorath, the royal family name, repeated twice, followed by a word I recognized from my brief training, law. My stomach twisted. Whatever law they were discussing, it involved me, and I had no way of knowing if it meant salvation or disaster. The princess must have noticed my growing panic, because she turned to me directly, and for the first time since I had barged into her chambers, her expression softened. She raised one long violet hand and placed it gently against her own chest, then pointed at me, then to the floor beside her, repeating the same word from before. Guest. I swallowed hard and nodded, even though I had no idea what I was agreeing to. It took nearly an hour before someone finally arrived who could translate. A slim, silver-haired diplomat named Priya Nathan, one of the senior human liaisons assigned to the ship, rushed into the chamber, looking as though she had run the entire length of the vessel to get there. Her uniform was wrinkled, her breath uneven, and the look on her face when she saw me standing calmly beside the princess was somewhere between horror and disbelief. She spoke rapidly in Velkaran to the officer, then to the princess herself, before finally turning to me with wide eyes. "You have no idea what you just walked into," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I told her I understood exactly how bad it looked, and that I had genuinely believed I was entering my own assigned quarters. I explained the corridor numbering, the confusing spiral layout of the ship, and the fact that my translator was still charging when I made the mistake. Priya relayed all of this to the officer, who listened carefully before responding. Priya's expression shifted from alarm to something closer to fascination. "She says you are either the bravest fool she has ever seen, or the luckiest," Priya translated. "Apparently, no unauthorized being has entered the princess's private chambers in over 4 centuries without facing immediate punishment. There is no clause in their law for accidental trespass, only for challenge or invitation." I felt my throat go dry. "So which one is this?" I asked. Priya turned to the princess, who was watching our exchange with obvious amusement, before answering my question with words I did not expect. "The princess has declared you an accidental guest. It is an ancient technicality, barely used anymore. It means that whatever punishment would normally apply is suspended, because she has chosen to extend you her protection instead." I looked over at the princess, who tilted her head again in that same curious, amused expression from before. "Why?" I asked quietly, half to Priya and half to the room itself. Priya asked the question aloud, and the princess answered with a long, unhurried sentence, her violet eyes never leaving mine. When Priya translated it back to me, her voice was quieter than before, almost reverent. "She says that in 400 years, no ambassador, no dignitary, no member of any allied species has ever made her laugh the way you did, in the moment you believed you were about to lose your head. She says most beings who enter her presence are stiff with formality, terrified of offending her, calculating every word. You were terrified too," she said, "but your fear was honest. It made you clumsy, not careful, and that honesty amused her more than any careful diplomacy ever has." I did not know what to say to that. I stood there, still processing the fact that my complete and utter humiliation had somehow become the thing that saved me. Word of what happened spread through the ship faster than I could have imagined. By the time I made it back to my actual quarters that night, escorted this time by 2 guards who seemed less hostile and more curious than before, I noticed people staring at me in the corridors. Some whispered, some outright stopped what they were doing to watch me pass. The next morning, I was summoned to the royal court, a place I had been warned about during my very first briefing on the ship. It was described to me as a chamber of pure formality, where every gesture carried weight, where a single misstep in posture or tone could unravel months of diplomatic negotiation. I had been told, in no uncertain terms, that lower-ranking exchange officers like myself would likely never set foot there during the entire length of our posting. And yet, here I was, walking through its towering doors less than a day after nearly getting myself executed for accidentally wandering into the wrong room. The court itself was breathtaking in a way that made my earlier panic feel almost small by comparison. Massive columns stretched upward into a ceiling lost in shadow, each one carved with symbols I could not read. Rows of advisors and nobles lined either side of a long walkway, their expressions ranging from curiosity to open suspicion as I passed. At the far end, seated on a raised platform, was the princess, and beside her, an older Velkaran man with deep-set eyes and markings that suggested significant authority. Priya walked beside me, translating in a low whisper as we approached. "That is her father," she murmured. "The reigning monarch. This is not just about you being cleared of wrongdoing. This is about the entire court understanding why she chose to spare you." My legs felt heavier with every step, but I forced myself forward, remembering the same clumsy bow I had given the night before, hoping it would serve me just as well here. When I reached the base of the platform, I bowed again, deeper this time, holding it a moment longer than necessary. A murmur rippled through the gathered nobles, some clearly unimpressed by a human attempting their customs, others watching with quiet interest. The monarch spoke first, his voice deep and measured, carrying easily across the vast chamber, without any need to raise it. Priya translated quickly beside me. "He wants to know why you entered his daughter's chambers, and he wants to hear it directly from you, in your own words, without polish." I straightened, my heart pounding, and told the truth exactly as it happened. I explained the confusing corridor layout, the mistake with the door panel, my exhaustion after 3 days of adjusting to their ship's schedule, and the fact that I had genuinely believed I was walking into my own assigned room. I did not try to make myself sound clever or brave. I simply told him what actually happened, mistake by mistake, exactly as clumsy and human as it truly was. When Priya finished translating, the chamber fell silent. The monarch studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to his daughter and asked her something directly. She answered without hesitation, her voice carrying the same warmth I had heard the night before. Priya's translation came a moment later, her voice steady despite the weight of the room around us. She says that his honesty is precisely why she chose to protect him. She says that anyone can perform confidence when it is convenient, but almost no one can maintain honesty when they believe their life is at risk. She says your fear did not make you dishonest. It made you real. The monarch considered this for a long moment, his gaze shifting between his daughter and me. Then, to the visible surprise of several nobles in the chamber, he nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to carry the weight of a formal decision. Priya's voice dropped as she translated his next words. "He says that the technicality invoked by his daughter will stand. You are cleared of any wrongdoing under Velkaran law. He also says, and this part clearly startled her as she translated it, that the guest status granted to you by the princess will remain in effect for the duration of your posting aboard this vessel." I did not fully understand the implications of that statement in the moment, but judging by the ripple of murmurs through the surrounding nobles, it was significant. After the formal proceedings ended, Priya pulled me aside into a quieter side chamber, her expression a mixture of disbelief and something close to amusement. "Do you understand what just happened?" she asked. I told her honestly that I did not fully. She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "That guest status is not just some minor formality. It means you have standing permission to be in the princess's presence whenever she allows it, without needing prior clearance from court officials. Nobody outside of Velkaran royalty itself has held that status in living memory. You walked into her private chambers by mistake, made her laugh harder than anyone has seen in decades, and walked out with a level of access that ambassadors spend entire careers trying to earn." I sat with that information for a long moment, trying to process how a single wrong turn down a spiraling corridor had turned into something so significant. Later that evening, I found myself standing outside the same door I had accidentally opened the night before, my translator earpiece firmly in place this time. I hesitated before pressing the chime, half expecting the guards to reappear and drag me away, for even considering approaching again. Instead, the door slid open smoothly, and the princess stood there, her expression calm, almost expectant, as though she had known I would return. I apologized again, properly this time, my earpiece translating my words clearly into her language. She listened patiently, then raised a hand to stop me before I could finish. "You already apologized enough last night," she said, her voice carrying a warmth I had not noticed before, likely because I had been too terrified to notice anything beyond the guards and their weapons. "I did not invite you here to hear another apology." I asked her, carefully, why she had invited me at all. She considered the question for a moment, her violet eyes studying me with the same curious intensity from the night before. "Because in this court," she said, "everyone who enters my presence has already rehearsed exactly what they intend to say. Every word is calculated. Every gesture is measured for effect. You had no such luxury. You were simply yourself, frightened and clumsy and entirely unprepared. And somehow that honesty was more refreshing than anything I have experienced in years." I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing. And for a while, neither did she. We simply stood there, two very different beings from two very different worlds, finding an unexpected understanding in the quiet space between us. Over the following weeks, word of the accidental guest continued to spread throughout the ship and eventually beyond it, reaching other allied vessels and even distant outposts. Other diplomats began treating me differently, some with newfound respect, others with poorly hidden envy. I did not seek out the attention, nor did I fully understand why a single mistake had elevated me so dramatically within a rigid and formal society. But I did understand one thing clearly. Somewhere between the panic of a locked door and the relief of an unexpected laugh, I had stumbled into something that no amount of careful planning or diplomatic training could have ever created. I had simply been myself, lost, nervous, and entirely unprepared, and it turned out that was exactly what an alien princess, surrounded by centuries of rigid formality, had been waiting for all along.